The Lancaster's starboard engine was screaming. Flight Lieutenant James Thornton fought the control column as the bomber pitched violently to the right, black smoke pouring from the wounded right cyclone. Through the cockpit glass, he could see the Ruhr Valley spreading below like a patchwork quilt stitched together with roads and rivers. "Skipper, we're losing altitude!" The voice of his navigator, Sergeant Davies, crackled through the intercom. Thornton didn't respond. His hands were too busy trying to keep 18 tons of aircraft from corkscrewing into the German countryside. The flak burst that had torn through their engine had also shredded the hydraulic lines. They were going down. "Everyone out! Bail out! Bail out!" Thornton's voice was steady, trained. 24 years old, 18 missions completed, and he'd never lost a crew member. Through the corner of his eye, he saw Davies scramble toward the escape hatch. One by one, white parachutes blossomed in the night sky behind them, illuminated by searchlights and the glow of burning aircraft. Thornton held the stick until the last confirmation came through. Then he reached for his own chute, clipped it on with practiced efficiency, and hauled himself toward the forward hatch. The wind hit him like a physical blow when he dropped through. He counted to 3, pulled the ripcord, and felt the violent jerk as the canopy deployed. The sudden silence was surreal. No engine roar, no screaming metal, just the whisper of wind through silk and the distant crump of his Lancaster hitting the earth 2 miles away. Thornton looked down. Trees rushed up to meet him. Branches tore at him, ripping his flight suit, his face, his hands. His left shoulder slammed into a thick limb, and white-hot pain exploded through his arm. Then everything went black. He woke to cold, bone-deep, shivering cold. His shoulder felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it. When he tried to move, his left leg buckled. Sprained ankle, maybe broken. His training kicked in through the fog of agony. Assess, orient, survive. He was lying in a ditch at the edge of a forest. His parachute hung like a white flag in the trees behind him. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. And in the distance, perhaps 200 meters away, stood a farmhouse with smoke rising from its chimney. Thornton's hand instinctively went to his service revolver, but the holster was empty, lost in the jump. He had no weapon, no food, no first aid kit, just a torn flight suit and the growing certainty that he was going to be captured within the hour. The farmhouse door opened. A man emerged, elderly, walking with a pronounced limp. He was carrying a hunting rifle, and he was looking directly at Thornton's parachute. There was nowhere to run. Thornton pressed himself into the ditch, watching as the old man began walking toward the forest. Every instinct screamed at him to surrender, but something held him still. The old man reached the parachute, examined it, then turned slowly. His eyes swept across the field, across the ditch, and for one terrible moment, their gazes locked. Time stopped. The old German's finger moved to the rifle's trigger guard. Thornton tensed, knowing he couldn't run, couldn't fight, but the old man didn't raise the rifle. He stared at Thornton for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Then he turned away, turned his back on an enemy pilot, and began walking toward the farmhouse. After 10 paces, he stopped, looked back over his shoulder, and jerked his head once toward the building. Thornton didn't move. This was insane. The man was going to get help, going to bring back soldiers. The old man stopped walking. Without turning around, he spoke in accented but clear English. "You wish to die in a ditch, Englishman? Or you wish to live long enough to see your home again?" Thornton looked at the forest behind him, at the parachute marking his position, at his useless leg. He began to crawl. Every meter was agony. His shoulder screamed, his ankle throbbed. But Thornton pulled himself forward until he reached the farmhouse yard. The old man had disappeared inside, but the door remained open. Thornton dragged himself up the steps and collapsed in the doorway. Through blurring vision, he saw a woman by the stove, her hand covering her mouth. A teenage girl pressed herself against the far wall, eyes wide. And the old man stood in the center of the room, rifle now leaning against the wall. "Greta," the old man said quietly to the woman, "get the medical kit. Liesel, close the door. Lock it. Close all the curtains. If anyone comes, he is not here. Verstanden?" The woman nodded slowly. The girl rushed to follow orders, her hands shaking as she pulled the curtains shut. The old man crouched down beside Thornton. "My name is Heinrich Bauer. You are in my home. You will stay here until you can walk, but you will tell no one of this, because if you speak of us, they will kill my family, my wife, my daughter. Do you understand?" Thornton managed a nod, though he understood nothing. Why was this man helping him? Heinrich stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up a framed photograph. A young man in a Wehrmacht uniform, smiling, proud. "My son, Werner," Heinrich said quietly. "He fights on the Eastern Front, and I pray every night that if his plane is shot down, if he is wounded and alone in enemy territory, that someone will show him the same mercy I show you now." The photograph blurred as Thornton's eyes filled with tears. This man wasn't helping him out of kindness or ideology. He was helping him because somewhere in Russia, another father's son might need the same help. "Thank you," Thornton whispered. Heinrich set the photograph back. "Do not thank me yet, Englishman. You are not safe, and neither will we, so long as you are here." The woman, Greta, approached with a basin of water and torn strips of cloth. She knelt beside Thornton, her movements efficient, practiced. When she cut away his flight suit sleeve, she hissed softly. The wound was ugly, deep, with metal fragments embedded in the muscle. What it got was hot water, rough spirits, and Greta's steady hands picking out the shrapnel piece by bloody piece. Thornton bit down on the leather belt Heinrich offered and tried not to scream. The girl, Liesel, stood in the corner, watching with wide eyes, too young to understand the risk her father had taken. "Where were you going?" Heinrich asked as his wife worked. "What was your target?" Thornton hesitated. Even wounded, even being helped, he was still a soldier. But looking at Heinrich's face, he realized the man wasn't asking for intelligence. "Essen," Thornton said finally. "The Krupp factories." Heinrich nodded slowly. "And when the bombs miss the factories, when they fall on the houses beside them, the schools, the hospitals?" Thornton had no answer. He knew how inaccurate their raids were, how many civilians died for every factory destroyed. It haunted him every time he climbed into the Lancaster's cockpit. "My son writes to us," Heinrich continued. "He tells us about the things he sees, the things his unit does." He stopped, shook his head. "War makes monsters of us all, English. You drop your bombs from the sky, we shoot prisoners in ditches, and we all tell ourselves we are the righteous ones." "Then why help me?" Thornton asked through gritted teeth. "If we're all monsters, why not turn me in?" Heinrich's laugh was bitter. "I fought in the First War, English. I watched my friends die in the mud of Verdun. And when it was over, when we came home broken, they spat on us, called us traitors." He gestured to his leg. "I left my youth in those trenches, my health, my faith in men who send others to die for their ambitions." He walked to the window, peered through a gap in the curtains. "So when they came again, with their flags and their speeches, I knew what it was, another lie, but my son believed. He volunteered." Heinrich's voice cracked. "And now I pray every night that he comes home." The room fell silent. Greta finished her stitching, bandaged his shoulder. She moved to his ankle next. Not broken, she wrapped it tightly. "You must stay hidden," Heinrich said. "If the neighbors see you, we will all die. The Gestapo does not forgive those who harbor enemy combatants." "How long?" "Until you can walk. Perhaps a week, perhaps 2. Heinrich's face was grim. "If they find you here, you must not let them take you in this house. If you care at all for the people saving your life, you will die fighting before you let them arrest you on our doorstep." Thornton understood. If the Gestapo found him here, the Bauers would be executed. "I understand." Heinrich helped him to his feet, supported his weight as they moved toward a narrow door. Behind it, steep stairs descended into darkness. The cellar. The days that followed blurred together. Thornton spent his time in the cellar, venturing upstairs only when Heinrich confirmed no patrols were passing. He slept on old blankets, ate whatever food the family could spare, and tried not to think about his crew. Missing in action, presumed dead. His mother would have received the telegram by now. Liesel brought him food twice a day, always silent, always wary. She never spoke to him, never met his eyes. To her, he was the enemy. But Greta was different. She changed his bandages each morning, checking for infection. Once, when Thornton's fever spiked on the third day, she sat with him through the night, cooling his forehead with damp cloths. Heinrich came less frequently, but when he did, he brought news. The Luftwaffe and SS were searching. 3 of Thornton's crew had been captured. 2 were still missing. "They are interrogating the prisoners," Heinrich said on the 5th day. "One of them may know about this area." "Then I should leave," Thornton said immediately. "Now, on that ankle, you would make it 3 kilometers before collapsing, and then they would torture you, and you would tell them everything." Heinrich shook his head. "No, you stay until you can truly escape." That night, Thornton was woken by voices upstairs, urgent, frightened, and then another voice, male, authoritative, German. Thornton's blood ran cold. Through the thin floorboards, he could hear snatches of conversation. "Routine inspection. All farms in the area." Footsteps overhead. Heavy boots. They were searching the house. The cellar door rattled. Thornton looked around frantically for a weapon. If they opened that door, it was over. Heinrich's voice louder now. "The cellar? Nothing down there but winter storage. Mind the stairs. They're rotted through. Lost a good goat down there last year." A pause. "We will check the barn instead," the officer said finally. More footsteps, the door opening and closing. Thornton stayed frozen for an hour, until Heinrich finally opened the cellar door. "They are gone," the old man said quietly. "But they will return. You cannot stay here much longer." "I know, another few days." "The border is 300 kilometers away. Through territory, crawling with patrols. You would need papers, ration cards. You would be caught." "Then what am I supposed to do? Stay until your son comes home and finds out his family died protecting an enemy pilot?" The words hit hard. Heinrich's face went pale. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he turned and climbed the stairs. Thornton sat in the darkness, hating himself. Heinrich had saved his life, and Thornton had thrown it back in his face. The next morning, Liesel brought his breakfast, but this time she didn't leave immediately. "Why do you bomb us?" she asked suddenly in halting English. "The cities, the homes, the children." Thornton had no good answer. "Because your military uses those cities. We're trying to end the war." "By killing everyone?" Her voice was small. "My friend Maria. She lived in Cologne. Her whole family died in a bombing raid. The baby too. Was that military?" Thornton felt sick. "I'm sorry. We don't want to kill civilians. That is what everyone says. That is what my brother says about Russia. Sometimes it happens anyway." She looked at him with sudden intensity. "But it is every time, every raid, every battle, and we all pretend it is not the point." She left before Thornton could respond. On the 8th day, Heinrich came with civilian clothes, a farmer's outfit, a small pack with food and a map. "There is a resistance group," Heinrich said quietly. "They help Allied prisoners reach neutral territory. I have made contact. They will meet you tomorrow night, 3 kilometers north, by the old mill." Thornton stared at the clothes. "How did you—" "It is better you do not know. But you must understand, these people expect you to return to England, to return to your squadron, to climb back into your bomber. Can you do that, after seeing what you have seen here?" Thornton thought about his crew. "The RAF needed every pilot. I'm a soldier. I have my orders." "Yes," Heinrich said softly. "We all have our duties, and we follow them until the war ends, or we do." He handed Thornton the pack. "Go tomorrow night, and then you will fly again, and I will pray again, and perhaps my son will come home." That night, Thornton couldn't sleep. He thought about Heinrich's limp and Greta's gentle hands and Liesel's haunted eyes. About Werner fighting in Russia. About the fact that in a week he'd be back over Germany, dropping bombs on people who might be sheltering a wounded pilot in their cellar. Morning came too soon. Greta brought breakfast one last time, checked his bandages, nodded in approval. Liesel didn't come. Heinrich appeared at noon with final instructions. "If they catch you, you were never here. You hid in the forest, you saw no one, verstanden, understood. And English. When you fly again, remember that there are people down here, people like us. We are not your enemy. We are just trying to survive." Thornton wanted to say he'd remember, that it would make a difference, but they both knew it was a lie. "I'll remember," he said anyway. As the sun set, Thornton changed into the civilian clothes. He tested his ankle. It held his weight. Good enough. Heinrich led him out under a cover of darkness. Greta stood in the doorway. Liesel was nowhere to be seen. Thornton wanted to thank them, but words felt inadequate. "Go," Heinrich said, pointing north. "Follow the road to the windmill. Cut east to the river. They will find you." Thornton shook the old man's hand. "Thank you for everything, if I ever find a way." "You will survive," Heinrich interrupted. "That is all I ask. And if you should hear of a Wehrmacht soldier named Werner Bauer, perhaps you will remember this night. Perhaps you will make sure he is treated well." "I will," Thornton promised. He turned and began walking. He didn't look back. The countryside was dark, silent except for distant aircraft overhead. British bombers heading east. More Lancasters, more crews, more men doing their duty. The windmill appeared against the night sky. Thornton cut east, following the river sound. The old mill sat beside it, decrepit, half its roof missing. A figure emerged from shadows. Young, wearing nondescript clothes, he spoke in rapid French. Thornton gave the countersign. The young man switched to English. "You are the pilot?" "Yes." "Come, we have a long way to travel." They walked through the night, avoiding roads, sticking to forest paths. When dawn came, they hid. When darkness fell, they walked again. 5 days of moving from safe house to safe house, crossing checkpoints with forged papers. On the 6th day, they reached the Swiss border. A narrow valley, a fence. The resistance fighters created a distraction. Thornton and 2 other prisoners cut through and ran, legs pumping, lungs burning. They crossed into Switzerland, gasping, alive against all odds. Within a week, Thornton was in Bern. Within 2 weeks, back in England. Within 3 weeks, standing before his squadron commander. "Medical check says you're fit to fly," the commander said. "You'll be back on operations within the month." Thornton nodded. That was how it worked. You survived, you healed, you flew again. He returned to his quarters and found letters waiting. His mother, overjoyed. His father, proud. His sister, chattering about home. And at the bottom, a newspaper clipping someone had left on his bunk. A brief article, easy to miss. A farmer and his family in the Ruhr Valley, arrested by the Gestapo for harboring an enemy pilot, executed by firing squad. Heinrich Bauer, age 52. Greta Bauer, age 48. Liesel Bauer, age 16. Thornton read it 3 times. The names were clear. The location was clear. There was no mistake. They had died because of him. Because they'd shown mercy to a stranger. Because Heinrich had prayed someone would show his son the same mercy. Thornton crumpled the clipping and sat on his bunk, unable to cry, unable to scream. Somewhere in Russia, Werner Bauer was still fighting, and he would come home to find his entire family executed as traitors. 3 weeks later, Flight Lieutenant James Thornton climbed back into a Lancaster bomber. His body had healed, but something inside remained broken. The target that night was Essen, the Krupp factories, the same target he'd been bombing when shot down. Thornton went through pre-flight checks and took off. Below, Germany spread out, cities marked by searchlights. Somewhere down there, Werner Bauer was receiving news about his family. Somewhere down there, other families huddled in cellars, praying. The bombardier's voice came through. "Approaching target. Bomb bay doors open." Thornton held the Lancaster steady despite the flak, despite everything, because that was his duty. Bombs away. The Lancaster lurched upward as tons of explosives fell toward the city. Thornton didn't watch them fall. He didn't think about what they might hit, who they might kill. He simply turned the bomber toward home and flew on, carrying the weight of 3 names he could never forget. Heinrich, Greta, Liesel. The war would go on for 2 more years. Thornton would fly 16 more missions, completing his tour. He would return to his family, rebuild his life, try to forget, but he never did. On quiet nights, he would think about an old farmer with a limp offering a choice, mercy or justice. Heinrich Bauer had chosen mercy, knowing the cost, and that choice had killed him. But it had also saved James Thornton. And Thornton lived with that fact every day for the rest of his long life, carrying the memory of 3 people who'd shown him what it meant to be human when humanity seemed lost. He never found out what happened to Werner Bauer. That story remained unfinished, one of millions of tragedies that ended without resolution. Just the war, grinding on, consuming the guilty and innocent alike. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more untold stories from history's darkest hours.